Hey guys, this is Blake here. I'm here to talk about the source code and Insidious. Just source code, just to get it out of the way. I thought it was a good movie. It had a real strong narrative. It was very interesting, very exciting, and full of suspense. And I thought the actors did really well with what they had to do, and they created some pretty interesting characters. My problem with it was the ending. It didn't work. It felt like they were trying to... I don't know, it felt very Hollywood to me, and it didn't fit with the rest of the movie, and it was very confusing, too. But otherwise, I'd definitely say you should give it a shot. It was a very, very good thriller. Much better than I expected, as I thought it was just going to be a ripoff of Deja Vu and all those movies. But it's... Even though, yeah, the premise is similar, it ends up becoming its own entity. So with Insidious, the more that I think about it, the more I realize that for horror fans like me, the 80s really were the best decade. You had guys like Wes Craven, Sean Cunningham, Dario Argento, Lucio Fulci, John Carpenter, George Romero, Tobe Hooper. Granted, some of these guys are a little bit better than the 70s, but for the most part, they were still, maybe not Tobe Hooper, but they were making some pretty interesting stuff in the 80s, too. Who do we have right now? I mean, these guys, some of these guys are still around, but they're not as good as they used to be. Right now we have James Wan, Eli Roth, Alexandre Aja, and Rob Zombie. Any other person I'm failing to mention is either I'm not thinking about them, or they've yet to really become full-on horror directors. Like the guy who did Paranormal Activity. He hasn't done a whole lot that I know of outside of that. So, are they any good? Well, the worst of them I'd say is Eli Roth. I think he has some talent, but for the most part, he's too pretentious and arrogant to really acknowledge his faults. And the end result is I don't see his movies becoming better anytime soon. And I haven't cared for... I think Hostel was his best movie, and that was just okay. Some people really do like him, though. After that, I guess Rob Zombie. Rob Zombie has made some really good movies, but then he's made some really bad movies, too. Like, I thought The Devil's Reject was great, but I thought House of a Thousand Corpses sucked. I thought his Halloween reboot was good, and I thought his sequel was pretty bad. But, so uneven with him. Alexandre Aja has yet to make a film I consider to be great. Even High Tension, which has got a lot of fandom, but... all of his movies have been good, like 3-star good. I've enjoyed them all. Piranha 3D, Hills of Eyes. I can't think of anything I was disappointed in with him. And, of course, my favorite of them, James Wan. James Wan, he broke into the scene with Saw, which I thought was a very good movie. Yeah, it has some faults, and I think Cary Elwes' acting sucked. But it was a very edgy and interesting thriller with an ending that stays with you quite some time. Dead Silence, it wasn't as good, but it was still pretty good. It was pretty spooky, even though I thought the ending was trying too hard to be Saw-ish. But then Death Sentence lost me. In terms of directing, he doesn't do a bad job. In fact, I was impressed with the fact that he was able to be more reserved compared to his first 2 films, but the script was just full of everything I thought was wrong with vigilante films in the 80s, and but it didn't really have what made vigilante films cool. But a lot of people disagree with me. It is actually a very popular movie among vigilante fans. But to me, it's like, take Cobra. It is an awful movie in terms of its script, but something about that movie's execution makes it into one of my favorite movies of all time. I love that movie. But Death Sentence did nothing for me. And more importantly, it bombed. So after that, it seems James Wan pulled an Eli Roth and retreated back to his room to sulk for a few years. Eli Roth did that with Hostel 2. And now he comes back with Insidious. Insidious isn't a great movie, but it is, I think, a pretty good movie. The problem that Insidious has is actually the same problem that all haunting possession films have. They're pretty much the same movie. In fact, I could take the script of this movie, pretty much take Poltergeist, Poltergeist 2, and a little bit of Paranormal Activity 2, and you pretty much have the exact same story, with a few tweaks, but, I mean, they have always had the same things. You have kids in peril, wives that seem to give in to the paranormal possibility too easy, while the husbands are always too skeptical up until the end. There's always sidekicks, usually female. There's nerds who study poltergeist type stuff. And the ending of this movie was kind of like Poltergeist 2, except less retarded, and actually pretty cool. So ultimately, the script is just very familiar, very conventional. It offers nothing that I'd consider really unique or new, even though, like I said, it has a few interesting touches. It's nothing that really got me excited. Luckily, James Wan has a very, very unique visual style. In fact, I can't even say I can't even compare it to anything. Obviously, it's closer to Dead Silence than Saw, but oddly, whereas Dead Silence, its main fear tactic was its silence, this one uses its music, which is total old school piano crunching, organ playing type shit. I love that stuff, and there's just a very odd use of colors like orange and gray, and I got some purple and red. It looks very unique. Nothing like nothing like I've ever seen before. And some of the imagery is just haunting. I love how these ghouls look. They look really freaky. There's like this Darth Maul looking bastard and some old woman that I thought was even actually kind of creepier. And what he does is he takes his visual style and goes all out in the final act. And it's stunning to look at, considering it only cost like $1 million to make. So ultimately, you liking the movie depends on how much you like the visual style. I thought it looked great, and I thought it was a very spooky. I wouldn't go so far as to call it as scary as Paranormal Activity, but it's also, I think, more entertaining. The thing with the Paranormal Activity movies is they have to scare you or creep you out for you to like them. With this one, it doesn't have to scare you, because I think it's pretty entertaining anyway, but it obviously helps. So it's not a classic, it's just another solid addition to James Wan's resume, and hopefully his next movie will be more groundbreaking. Because my main disappointment with this was that with Saw, he started a trend, whereas this one he seems to be bandwagon jumping onto the Paranormal Activity successes. So all in all, I'd recommend it if you're into horror films. If you want a good creepy time, definitely check out Insidious. And I think you should also check out the source code. If you want to read my written review to Insidious, just check the link in my description. Now, I have one problem with Insidious that's going to be a bit of a spoiler, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I hope you're gone if you don't want to listen to this. I didn't like the ending. It felt like James Wan was trying to do your typical Saw-type downer ending. And for one, it's predictable. You almost expect that shit to happen now. But I just didn't think it was very effective. It just was low-key. Whereas Saw, and even to a lesser extent, Dead Silence, they had endings that stayed with you. This one, it didn't. So I'd hope in the future that James Wan doesn't feel quite bound to do downer endings. But we'll see. That's it. I'll see you guys later.